How is the virtual tribe doing? What's going on, guys? An episode that came out of the tribe for the tribe. Men helping men, iron sharpening iron. I like that. The lever action versus the bolt action. This scrappy little fight goes back a long way. Now, both technologies kind of predate this, but we're talking 1800s. 19th century duel. Lever action versus bolt action. That's what we're going to talk about today on Gunfighter Life. Hey, so, talking about the tribe and how awesome you guys are, God provides. God is very good. I'm very thankful for all you guys here. This is going to be episode 700 on Gunfighter Life. Now, some episodes are reruns, and I don't always go back and delete the other ones, so I don't know what actual number it is, but 700 is a lot of episodes. If you guys have listened to even half of the content, that it just is very humbling to me. I'm humbled and blessed to be able to talk to you guys and give advice. I really am, and I appreciate you guys. I thank God, number one. I thank the patrons who step up and actually support the podcast, and I thank you listeners for everybody that listens. With that, I'm going to plug in the bio, and then we'll get into the main topic, lever actions versus bolt actions. I'll roll into a quick abbreviated bio and then into the main topic. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I don't apologize for that. God is number one in my life. I grew up hunting and fishing in the backwoods of the southeastern United States at a very early age. Some of my earliest memories are with firearms. I joined the Marine Corps at 17, did a couple of combat tours in Iraq. By God's grace, He got me through that safely. After that, I served as an instructor, an urban warfare instructor and a desert warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. I also served with the LAPD, both full-time as a sworn police officer and in some more specialized assignments, as well as serving in the U.S. Army, full-time and part-time National Guard. I've been a FBI firearms instructor, still am an FBI firearms instructor, have been for a lot of years, also NRA certified and some other three-letter government agency certified. I've been a private contractor for a three-letter government agency I won't specify. I've been the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. By God's grace, He got me through all that in one piece, not because I'm better, but because He chose to have grace and mercy on me. I've been a professional hunter and guide. Professionally hunted things like buffalo and elk. Not many people today can say they've done that, but I'm blessed to be able to say that I have. I've hunted everything from white-tailed deer on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast to gray squirrel on the East Coast to prairie dog on the West Coast and elk and bear and wolf and slain all manner of beast. A state rifle and pistol champion a few times over in a few different disciplines. Enough about me, guys. Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and fingers for battle. Let's get into today's topic. So, let's get down to the nitty-gritty, as Nacho Libre would say. The battle of the manual transmissions. If you want to run the gun yourself, if you're like, semi-auto is cool technology and all, but I want to do it myself. I want to by force eject that old round out and shove that new round in. Like a man. If you're like that mindset, like I want a manual transmission gun. I want to run the gun myself. There are some other actions, but kind of the big two for rifles are going to be lever action and bolt action. What are the pros and cons here? That's what we're talking about today. A quick caveat, I'm talking about traditional lever action guns. We're talking pre-Spitzer bullets to stack in a tube magazine, like that traditional kind of lever action. Some of the most iconic, the Winchester 94, the Marlin 336, we're talking about that kind of lever action. Also, for the bolt actions, we're talking about traditional kind of turn bolt action rifles. I'm not talking about like a straight pull, like a Swiss straight pull or a Savage Impulse. Just because we could get off on the rails. I'm talking about the two main categories here. All right, let's start with a criteria that is not actually based on physics, but based on your wallet. How much money are you willing to spend? Because unless you find a really good deal on a used one, most good, what I would call good, reputable manufactured lever actions are expensive. They're 2024 post-inflation prices. Forget about what they used to cost. My wife gets on me all about that all the time. I'm like, it's so expensive. And she's like, you're thinking about pre-COVID prices. Stop it. And she's right. We don't live in a pre-COVID price world. A decent new lever action from Marlin, from many of the big manufacturers, are going to cost you well north of $1,000, $1,000 to $1,500 at the time of this recording in the year of our Lord 2024. That may go drastically up. Now, again, you might find a good deal on a used one, but you're talking $1,000 to $1,500. If you want like a new Marlin 3030, or you want a brand new Winchester Model 94, these guns are not cheap. And we'll get into why they're not cheap in another part of this. But for that, just the price alone. The only cheaper ones I can think of are the Rossi. And now you have to decide whether you want to trust your life to, if it's a practical gun, not just a fun gun, are you going to trust your life to a Rossi? Maybe the answer is yes, right? But even so, those are $700, $800, $600, $700, $800 for some of the nicer Rossis, which is basically a copy that I'm aware of is a copy of a 94, Winchester Model 94. So there's price. You can get a really good bolt action. It's not apples to apples, but you can get a really good bolt action, Savage Axis, a plain Jane, Ruger American, what I would consider a budget rifle, a Tikka T3, for a fraction of that cost. There's the Mossberg Patriot, right? A fraction of that cost. So cost is a big one. Now, why might they be more expensive? Well, here's our first big thing in practicality. If money is no object, you're just making it rain bullets and ammo. Like, I'm going to buy a 45-70 just because I want to spend more money on ammo, because ammo is no object to me. Money is no object to me. Just making it rain. Why are they more expensive, though, in 2024? Because they're more complicated. They're a more complicated machine. A lot of people think of lever action rifles as simple because they're simple for you, the end user, to operate. You pull the lever out, theoretically everything works properly, you push the lever back in, you got a new cartridge. But if you've ever taken apart a Winchester 94 or something like it, they are like a Swiss watch inside. It's kind of like a revolver. Revolvers are in general more complicated than newer semi-autos, and you can get mad at that, but go look at how many moving parts are in a Glock versus how many moving parts are in a Smith & Wesson 686. Revolvers are very complicated machines. They're easy for the end user. You pick it up, you pull the trigger, it goes bang. But there's a lot going on in there. If you're used to taking apart, like, let's say, a Glock or an AR-15 even, which is a semi-auto, or we'll get into how simple the bolts are later, and then you go to take apart a lever action Winchester Model 94, it is not easy. It is not intuitive. If you've ever thought about completely taking down your Winchester 94 just for fun to give it a deep clean, don't. That's your tactical tip of the day if I don't think of another one. If you're ever thinking about disassembling your lever action completely to give it a deep clean, don't. Pay somebody else to do it. It's like changing drum brakes on your car. Can I do it? Yeah. Pay somebody else. It's a giant pain because they are so complicated. Again, easy for the end user, but there's a lot going on in there. And in general, when you have more going on, there's more things that can go wrong. As much as I love 1911s, and from the shooting point of view, I would much rather shoot a 1911 than a Glock. I will have to admit that there's a lot less things that go wrong with a Glock than a 1911. A 1911 is kind of for an aficionado. It's kind of for somebody that doesn't mind the extra maintenance and the extra upkeep and the extra complexity of parts. Again, look at the amount of moving parts in a 1911 versus a Glock. And it's kind of what you see throughout firearms history, if I can just if I can wax philosophical on firearms history, in general, when you get a thing, as you progress linearly through time, the amount of moving parts required to make a thing happen in a firearm become less. If you look at some of the early semi-autos and then you look at an AK-47, the designs got simpler. It's a simple machine that does what it does. If you look at a 1911, or let's go back, how about the Luger? If you look at how complex a Luger is versus a Glock, some of the beauty and genius in that is the simplicity. Well, the lever-action rifle even predates the 1911, and it is a product of its era. It is, and we're talking the more traditional lever actions, it is a complex machine. And that complexity may or may not matter to you, but if you say, in general, whatever spring has X amount of life and has X amount of chance of malfunctioning, a lever action in general, going back to the main theme of the topic, a lever action is going to have more springs in it, more levers, more doohickeys and thingamabobs, widgets and sprockets, to use technical terms here, than a bolt action is going to have. It's a more complicated machine. Again, people think that lever actions are simple. They are simple in the fact that they're simple for you to use, but they're not simple inside. The same way that a revolver is simple in that it's simple for you to use, but it's very complicated inside. A lot of little parts and widgets and sprockets. Again, to use technical, really complicated vernacular. They're complicated machines. And a lot of that stuff has to work in conjunction with itself to work properly. Conversely, the bolt action, and in general, some of the well-known bolt action rifles, the Winchester Model 70, which is a refined version of a Model 1903 Springfield, which is a refined or a different version, I wouldn't even say refined, I'd just say different version of a Mauser 98, which there's older versions of that without getting into too much history. That is one of the most simple, repeatable firepower machines on the planet. Go look at the amount of moving parts in a Mauser 98 or a Springfield 1903 or a Winchester Model 70, which, let's be honest, functionally are the same machine, versus a Winchester 94 or a Marlin 336 or Winchester 1873, right? And any of these. And a lot of the newer guns are just copies of those. They're a simple, rugged, and robust machine. And I have to imagine that this is a big reason why lever actions never saw mass military adoption. I don't know, settle down. I know that, the American military and cavalry and stuff, we did use some lever actions post-Civil War for a very brief period. And there was a very brief period where people were looking at this versus the bolt action. But as soon as the bolt actions became readily available and kind of proven technology and reliable, we kind of went away very quickly from lever action rifles. And you might also point out that not us, but the Russians, of all people, used the lever action in World War I in the Winchester Model 1885 in the 7.62 by 54R. They did that because that was their standard service caliber, and as I understand it, they would take any rifle in that caliber they could get. They didn't drop the Mosin Nagant and mass issue the Winchester 1885. And I think there's two big reasons why the militaries at this time period, the late 1800s, early 1900s, did not mass adopt lever actions. The complication has two main things. One is cost. I don't know what a Mosin Nagant cost to produce, but I imagine a Winchester Model 1885 costs quite a bit more. It's a more complicated machine. And when you're trying to equip millions of troops, I forget what military or political person said this, but it was in regards, I think, to Soviet technology. Quantity has a quality all its own. You got several million ground army equipped with a Mosin Nagant. It may not be the best rifle in the world, but you got millions of them. So cost is a big one. Much like why modern police departments mass issue Glocks, not because it's the best handgun, because they're cheap. There are other reasons, but that's a big one, cost. And the other one is complexity. You're talking about trench warfare. You're talking about icy, snowy conditions like the Winter War. You're talking about nasty, disgusting Pacific Theater jungles and salt water and all that stuff. Sand and grit and grime and blood and sweat. The simplicity of a bolt-action rifle design has a lot of advantage in that kind of real-world environment. Now let's talk about rate of fire. Now, capacity and rate of fire. In general, I know there's exceptions, but in general, the tube feed of the lever actions we're talking about will generally have a little bit more capacity than the military bolt actions of the day. And again, I know there are exceptions. But in general, let's say a little bit higher capacity, and that's going to depend on which specific ones you're looking at. And the rate of fire, if you're just like, hey, empty this gun, is going to be faster with the lever action rifle, I think. And it's close. It's close. I would love to see somebody do a mad minute, like a Winchester 1873 versus a mad minute with a Enfield, which is a pretty fast bolt action rifle and a pretty fast lever action rifle. Probably known for being some of the fastest, a Winchester 1873 and an Enfield rifle. I would like to see that, but they're fast in different ways. If you're just talking about rate of fire, split times, like one shot versus another, the lever action should theoretically be a little bit faster. However, if you're talking about reloading the gun, so if you're talking about a long battle, I think the bolt-action rifle has a beat because most of the bolt-action rifles of the era load from the top, a lot of times with stripper clips. And if you ever completely empty out a lever action, it's not super fast to reload. It's not very fast to reload the entire gun. I think it's faster on a bolt-action. And again, there's a lot specific to the guns, but I think in general, if you're going to top off from completely empty to completely full, a bolt-action is going to be faster most of the time. Here's another caveat, though. Once the Kingsgate came along, and this is popular on many bolt-action rifles you see, or the Kingsgate is popular on many lever-action rifles you see today. It's pretty old, but on most lever-action rifles, this is the door on the side of the receiver to let you put rounds in. This was an important development in lever actions because if you're talking about a practical scenario, you can shoot one, load one, shoot one, load one. In general, that's easier to do on the Kingsgate lever action. So if you're talking about some kind of tactical scenario where you're moving through the woods, moving through a field of fire, trying to not get shot, running into a ditch, micro terrain, something like that, while you're Oscar Mike on the move, if you have the presence of mind, you can top off 1-2 rounds, shoot 1-2 rounds, load 1-2 rounds. And for your judicious marksman, a lot of times in real-world conditions, that's a lot more practical than just emptying a gun in a general direction and just having to reload the whole gun. If you can shoot and move and communicate, locate, close with, and destroy the enemy by fire and maneuver, when you're doing that maneuvering, let's say you shoot 2 or 3 shots, you can top off 2 or 3 shots. And the gun is still hot. Like let's say let's just pick 10. I have 10 rounds in my lever action, and I shoot 1 or 2 and I'm running to the next tree forward. I can load 1 or 2 rounds while I'm on the move. And if I get 1 round in and it's not completely loaded, I can still shoot. Like if that hostile Comanche back in the day pops up and I'm trying to load, but he pops up, I can still shoot him. The gun's still got some rounds in it. With a bolt action, in general, I'm shooting, and if I go to reload, I have to take the gun out of action to reload. Even if you're talking about a detachable box magazine, you're going to have to remove that magazine and then somehow hold it and hold the rifle and then reload. So you're probably not reloading that on the move like you are with the lever action with a Kingsgate. So that's a pretty cool tactical advantage if we're talking about that. Now here's a big one and another big reason quickly to get into firearms history. We dropped the 30-40 Krag like it was hot for the 1903 Springfield. And this is right around the time where Spitzer bullets, and Spitzer just means a pointed bullet. Most modern bullets that you see today in a rifle are going to be pointed. And there are exceptions, like sometimes I'll shoot a 220 grain 30-06 load that's a round nose. But the vast majority, 308, 6.5 Creedmoor, 270, and they're pointed bullets. That's a Spitzer bullet. Well, When these came about, they greatly increase, point blank range. You can take a 45-70 and hit a buffalo at 1,000 yards. People did it, but that's when they had a known range. They knew their trajectory. They had time to adjust. And, in a real world fight where somebody might pop up at 50 yards, they might pop up at 350 yards. Point blank range doesn't mean really close. It means I can aim somewhere at the center of mass and hit somewhere on that target. That's point blank range. And a modern Spitzer bullet is a great advantage in that. And again, there are other designs. We talked about the 1885, but most of these are tube feet. And if you don't know, forgive the mansplaining or the tactisplaining to you guys, but in a tube magazine, rounds stack one behind the other. The primer is in the back of the round, and the pointed bullet is in the front of the round. So if you stack those, you have the potential for a chain detonation. The rounds can possibly detonate in the tube, so you're limited to round-nosed bullets. That's why when you look at like a 30-30, it's a round-nosed bullet. Most of these bolt-action rifles, they're going to fire a Spitzer bullet. And they're going to fire a bottleneck Spitzer bullet, higher pressures in general, much higher pressures, much greater point-blank range, which again can be a great advantage. Now, that may not apply to you, right? If you live in Georgia, the odds of you in a hunting or tactical scenario where it's better for you to shoot than just take cover or get closer and shoot past 200 yards, in Georgia, probably not very likely. Yeah, I know there's big bean fields and cornfields and stuff like that, but if you're in a tactical scenario, don't go into the middle of a field. Walk around in the woods around the field. Don't walk through a field if it's any kind of hostile environment, non-permissive environment. You're just asking for trouble. And if it's hunting, you can probably get closer than 2 football fields. So as much as that is a military advantage for the average person, it is an advantage, but most deer are taken inside 100 yards. So if you're talking about hunting, plenty of deer and elk and many other critters have been put in the dirt with a 30-30. But just know that in general, if you're talking about the traditional lever action, you're limited to, in general, lower pressure. The actions just aren't as strong if we're talking about traditional lever actions, and we're talking about round-nosed bullets. I know there's lever evolution. I understand that. I'm talking about in general. So that's another big difference. Now let's talk about accuracy, ruffles and feathers. Let me go out on a limb here and say bolt actions are more accurate than lever actions. I know you can have a super tack-driving, crazy accurate lever action rifle, but in general, bolt actions are just quite a bit more accurate. Now, is that practical accuracy going to matter? Let's say that a classic, talking about 2024. So let's stick with it. You're going out and buying a new lever action gun. Let's say it's a really, really good shooting lever action gun. Let's say 3 MOA. 3 MOA is not bad. In 3 MOA, the accuracy of that rifle probably exceeds the abilities of the cartridge. Like let's say 3 MOA, that's 6 inches at 200 yards. Your classic 30-30 is basically tapped out for practical hunting at 200 yards. So it's plenty accurate enough for what it was designed for. 6 inches at 200 yards, 3 inches at 100 yards, 1.5 inches at 50. That's plenty accurate. Many of your even budget rifles, let alone if you spend what a new lever action is going to cost, $1,000, $1,500, a lot of those rifles today guarantee MOA accuracy. And I don't think MOA accuracy quite means what you think it means, but let's say 1.5 inches. Let's say most rifles will shoot 1.5 inches 3-shot group. Bolt actions, most modern bolt actions will shoot 1.5 inches 3-shot group at 100 yards. And let's say most lever actions will shoot 3 inches. And you might get one that shoots worse, you might get one that shoots better, but let's just say, for argument's sake, 3 inches. You're talking twice as accurate. Now, again, does that matter for practical distances? If you're a real hyper accuracy guy, then the bolt action is just a better way to go. If you're like practical accuracy, it doesn't really matter. My ability to run the gun is much more important to me, and my enjoyability of shooting the gun is more important, then I'd say, yeah, practical accuracy for you both are probably going to be accurate enough. But just the way that bolt actions can be designed with a free-floated barrel, with less moving parts, with less interaction between the barrel and other things like a forearm and a barrel band and things like that. In general, and it's pretty safe to say, bolt actions are a lot more accurate than lever actions. Again, and whether that matters to you is up to you. Also, we are talking about bolt actions. To me, and I've done a whole episode on this, there's a big bifurcation. Not all bolt actions are created equal. But to me, there's a big difference in a controlled round feed and a push feed. I think a controlled round feed bolt action rifle can be one of the most dependable, rugged, repeatable firearms on the planet. Rugged, robust, huge claw extractor. A push feed, not so much. I think that a good controlled round feed rifle is one of the most reliable guns on the planet. That's why they're preferred by dangerous game hunters. It's one of the reasons why the Winchester Model 70 is sought after, the pre-64 Winchester Model 70, and in the newer ones are controlled round feed too, but there's a reason that action is so sought after and so appreciated. There's the mechanical reliability of a gun if everything works correctly. And then there's the human element, meaning that if it's a manual transmission gun, meaning you have to eject that cartridge and put in a new one, there's the potential for you to mess something up. I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole, but controlled round feeds eliminate quite a bit of that, you being able to induce a malfunction. If you're talking about the reliability of a good proven design of a lever action versus a push feed, I'd call it a wash. I'd say they're both about equally reliable. A push feed versus a lever action. Any good proven design, if you do, and here's the caveat, if you do what you're supposed to do, run it like you're trying to break it, it's probably going to feed properly. Now, where are you going to be able to do that? If you've lost some blood, if you're winded, if you trip and fall, you start introducing the human element to that. It's like pump action shotguns are some of the most reliable, repeatable firepower guns on the planet. But if you've ever run any kind of tactical scenario in law enforcement or anything where guys run pump guns, you'll know that when they get excited, you can mess that up. It's a simple operation, all the way back hard and all the way forward hard. But you start getting excited, you start doing it when you're moving, when you're winded, when you're trying to do 3 or 4 other things, talk on the radio, find out where the guy ran, remember where your partner is so you don't shoot him, and take cover and run the pump at the same time. You can induce some malfunctions. And you can do the same thing with a bolt action or a lever action. So if you were talking about a push feed, like a Remington 700, versus a lever action, and most, proven design lever action rifles made of good quality, an actual Winchester, not a copy of a Winchester, but an actual Winchester 94, or a Marlin 336, or a push feed, I'd call it a wash. If we're talking about a controlled round feed, I'd say they're more reliable. And they're more reliable when an actual human being is running them as well. So, make yourself kind of a checklist. Make up your own mind on this. What is important to you? Do you want a more powerful cartridge with a modern Spitzer bullet? I know like 4570 is super powerful, but it is super powerful for a lever gun. But if you look at even modern loaded 4570 versus a pretty vanilla 30-06 180 grain, you'll quickly see which one's actually more powerful. And we're talking about a big, beefy modern 4570 versus a pretty vanilla Walmart 180 grain, like Remington Quarlock. See what actually is more powerful. And you could be a big, heavy, slow bullet guy and decide you want the 4570, that's fine. But we have to go to the extreme. If I talk about a really beefy bolt action, like a 300 Win Mag or a 35 Whalen, 9.3 by 62, right? They're more powerful, bottlenecked, modern, higher pressure rounds. Is that important to you? Answer maybe yes, answer maybe no. You may decide you want a, 30-30 is fine because you don't want to deal with the recoil. 30-30 will kill deer all day long inside of 200 yards. Are you going to use it in austere conditions? You might say, no, this is just my hunting rifle and I'm a fair weather hunter. When it's sleeting sideways, raining, I'm not going hunting. Then it doesn't really matter. If you're like, this is my grab and go, Chinese are invading, I'm heading for the hills, and I'm going to be out there, rain or shine, mud, blood, whatever, you may decide the ability to, operate in really austere environments, the ability to crunch some ice with the action, That might be important to you, or maybe it's not. Again, you make up your own mind on that. As far as firepower, do you want the ability of a detachable magazine, which many bolt-action rifles have? You may decide that's more important. You may decide you like the Kingsgate idea and you want to be able to shoot 1 or 2 and load 1 or 2 on the move. Or you may decide that you just want the higher rate of fire, that the odds of you ever getting into some kind of tactical situation, certainly hunting situation, but tactical situation where you need more than 8 or 10 or 12 rounds, and the ability to reload is a moot point for you. You just want a fast rate of fire, first, second, third, fourth shot. Lever action is probably going to be it for you. It's probably going to be what you want. And I want to kind of wrap this up by saying, guys, I think I have been too hard on people talking about what's the most practical. I've been harping on that a lot lately, mostly because I see guns as practical tools. I make my living with a gun. The bio is a little bit older, but I'm back again doing private security contract work. So what I do day to day, bread and butter. I see a gun as a way to keep myself breathing and somebody else breathing, and for that I want a practical tool. Not everybody sees guns that way, and that's fine. If lever actions just get you going, you decide that's the gun you want to take out and shoot, cool. If you just decide you really love the Mauser 98 and it's the best rifle ever designed by humans and you just want to go out and run 8 Mauser in a bolt action, that's great. The more important is your skill and confidence with that gun. Who cares if I think it's not as practical as an M4 or a Scar 17? If you're actually going to get out and train with it, that's more important for you. Your ability, familiarity, and confidence with that gun is really important. So don't always think you have to pick the most practical thing. Are there arguably better hunting rifles in 2024 than a lever action 30-30? Yeah. Will a 30-30 kill most things in most places the way that most people see and hunt game? Yeah, it still will. And it's totally fine. And if you like a lever action 30-30 and you're going to get out and shoot it and practice with it, that's great. That's fantastic. So I just wanted to kind of do this episode to point out some thoughts on a lever action versus a bolt action, the manual transmissions of the rifle world. There are other actions, but those are kind of the two big ones for manual transmission. And those are some of my thoughts on them. Thank God, first and foremost, for this podcast. If you appreciated this, though, this came out of a Patreon chat, so be thankful to the patrons. If you're not one, patrons support the show. I refuse corporate sponsors on this show because I don't want to be bought and paid for, like, oh, the Marlin lever action came out. It's the best thing that's ever been made. It's so cool, even though it's been around for... the Marlin 336 came out, I think, in like 1940-something. But it's so cool. It's so hot right now. It's a good gun. It's a good gun. But I'm saying that because it's a good gun, not because they paid me to say it. If you appreciate that, the patrons help make this podcast possible by supporting without taking bribes. If you want to be part of that, you want to support the podcast, American, veteran-owned, small business, and you want a lot of cool insider-only content, because patrons get a lot of really cool content that just doesn't come out on the regular podcast. Consider becoming a patron. There should be a Patreon link in the show notes. With that, your tactical tip of the day. So we talked about lever actions. A lot of people run a lever action with their hand inside the lever, and they push it back and pull it forward. If you're going to do that and do it a lot and run it like you broke it, you might want to wrap that with some paracord or some leather, depending on the tactical ensemble you're going for. But there's a way that I like to do it better, especially if you're familiar with shooting a pistol-gripped firearm. It's not exactly a pistol grip, but grab the front of the lever with your 4 fingers, well, your 3 fingers, because the one's going to be working the trigger. But you grab the front of that lever, not put your hand in between the lever, but grab the front portion of the lever and pull it and push it back. Try that technique, and then when you come back, rest your finger on the trigger. It's kind of a quasi-pistol grip, and I think it gives you a lot more leverage. Now, if it's a smooth action, everything's working smooth, that's fine, but you get a little bit of dust, a little bit of dirt, mud in there. You need to run it hard and fast. You might try that grabbing the front of the pistol grip technique and yanking it forward and yanking it back. Run it like you're trying to break it. If you actually break the gun running it like that, it was probably a piece of junk to begin with. That's your tactical tip of the day, your tactical verse of the day. This one talking about patrons was posted in the chat last night by Josh. How can a young man keep his way pure? by guarding it according to your word. With my whole heart I will seek you. Let me not wander from your commandments. I have stored up your word in my heart, that I might not sin against you. Thanks for listening, and have a blessed day.